This meeting is for heirs only, the lawyer said. I set the deeds to Dad's properties on the table. You mean the ones I already bought? Their inheritance disappeared in an instant. They thought they'd celebrated their ultimate victory the day my father died, triumphantly banning me from his will reading. What they didn't know was that my dad, the man they so brazenly underestimated, had woven a final, breathtaking trap just for them. The air in my high-rise Singapore office was electric with the buzz of a massive real estate deal, rain lashing against the skyscraper windows, when my phone screamed a number I hadn't seen in half a decade. That single call plunged my world into an icy abyss, signaling not just an ending, but the beginning of a relentless, brutal fight. The voice on the other end was Chloe, a childhood friend I hadn't spoken to since I left town. Her voice, usually so steady, cracked with a raw pain that instantly sobered me. Ethan, she choked out, your father. Arthur, he passed away last night. 5 years. 5 agonizing years since I'd last set foot in Maplewood, the small, familiar town where I'd grown up. 5 years since that explosive, heartbreaking argument with my father that had sent me halfway across the world, determined to carve out my own empire in international real estate. Now, I was returning, not as the prodigal son, but as a grieving stranger, carrying the hollow ache of unresolved conflict. The taxi pulled up to the sprawling Victorian house, our family home. A tidal wave of memories crashed over me. The basketball hoop where Dad taught me to shoot, the porch swing where we'd talk business late into summer evenings, the garden where we'd buried Mom when I was just 10. Everything felt strangely diminished, like my adult memories had inflated the scale of my childhood world. Brenda's sleek silver Mercedes glinted in the driveway, flanked by 2 other unfamiliar luxury cars. My father, Arthur, had always preferred his old Cadillac, practical, reliable, unpretentious, just like him. I paid the driver, my suitcase suddenly impossibly heavy, and stood at the bottom of the familiar steps. Before I could even touch the doorbell, the front door swung open. My stepsister, Ashley, stood there, her face a carefully composed mask of somber politeness. But her eyes? They were cold, devoid of genuine grief. Ethan, she said, her voice flat, we weren't sure you'd come. He was my father, I replied simply, my own voice tight. She stepped aside, and I walked into a house that no longer felt like home. The foyer, once filled with Arthur's warm woods and worn leather, was now Brenda's ultramodern vision, chrome, glass, and uncomfortable-looking furniture. Mother's in the living room with Cody and some guests, Ashley informed me, not bothering to offer to take my bag. Brenda, my stepmother, was perched on a stark white leather sofa, holding court amongst a gaggle of town locals I vaguely recognized. Her perfectly painted face initially registered shock when she saw me, then swiftly rearranged itself into the practiced sorrow of a grieving widow. Ethan, she cooed, rising to air-kiss my cheek. What a surprise. We tried to reach you, of course, but your number had changed. It hadn't. I'm sorry for your loss, I said formally, knowing this was just the opening act of a carefully choreographed performance. When's the funeral? Tomorrow at 2. My stepbrother, Cody, interjected, not bothering to unsprawl himself from an armchair. We've handled all the arrangements. The message was delivered loud and clear. I wasn't needed. I wasn't wanted. Your old room is being used for storage now, Brenda added, a saccharine smile on her lips. But we can make up the guest room for you. I nodded, suddenly desperate to escape the weight of their hostile stares. I think I'll get settled then. As I turned to leave, Brenda's voice, honey-sweet with venom underneath, stopped me. Gary Thompson is handling the estate matters. He'll be here in the morning to discuss some paperwork. Family only. You understand. I understood perfectly. I was being explicitly, undeniably excluded from my own father's will reading. The audacity. Chloe found me later, hunched on the back porch, staring at the old oak tree where Dad and I had built a treehouse when I was 8. They've been absolutely awful, Ethan, she said, her voice softer now, sitting beside me. Ever since Arthur got sick, they've been acting like they own the town. Brenda's been meeting with developers, talking about selling off properties, everything. Chloe, who had grown up next door and stayed in Maplewood to run her family's hardware store, revealed that my father's health had deteriorated rapidly in the last year, information Brenda had conveniently withheld. "Your dad asked about you," Chloe added quietly, a pang of sadness in her tone. "All the time. He kept your international magazine features in his office." A sharp knot tightened in my chest. "His office, it's still intact?" Chloe shook her head. "Brenda cleared it out last week. Everything boxed up, moved to storage. She even changed the locks." I thanked Chloe, my mind a furious whirl, and headed back inside. The guest room was exactly as I'd expected, impersonal, cold, utterly devoid of my history. As I unpacked, muffled voices drifted from the hallway. "Once Gary confirms the will tomorrow, we can move forward with the Riverside property sale," Brenda was saying, her voice edged with glee. "Mark Jenkins has already made an offer." "What about Ethan?" Cody asked, his tone laced with a hint of concern. "Think he'll cause problems?" Brenda's laugh was sharp, cutting. "What can he do? Arthur left everything to us. Ethan made his choice when he abandoned his father." I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking, a maelstrom of anger and grief churning inside me. Abandoned? Dad and I had our differences, yes, but abandoned? I'd called for months after I left, only to have Brenda tell me he was too busy or not interested. Eventually, I'd stopped trying, the silence a deafening confirmation of my banishment. That night, sleep was impossible. I wandered the house, a ghost in my own memories. In the library, I found some of my old books still on the shelves. My fingers traced the spine of my favorite, The Count of Monte Cristo. Dad had given it to me on my 16th birthday, his inscription still clear, to Ethan, remember that patience and planning always win in the end. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, an envelope slipped out and fluttered to the floor. Inside was a letter, in my father's distinctive, elegant handwriting, dated just 3 months ago. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm likely gone. Brenda doesn't know about this letter or the arrangements I've made. There's a safety deposit box at First National, box number 247. The key is taped to the back of the Monte Cristo painting in my office. Whatever you may think of me, know that I always had a plan." "Dad." My heart slammed against my ribs. "A plan." I made my way to Dad's office. The door was locked, just as Chloe had said. But I remembered. The loose floorboard in the hallway, where Arthur always kept a spare key. Some things never change. Inside, the room was stripped bare. No papers, no books, no personal items. But the painting, the Count of Monte Cristo painting, it still hung on the wall. I carefully removed it, my fingers finding the small key, exactly where Dad said it would be. Tomorrow I decided I would visit the bank. And Gary Thompson's office. It was time to unearth exactly what my father had been planning. Growing up as Arthur Harrison's son meant learning about real estate before I could even ride a bike. Other fathers taught their kids to throw baseballs. Mine taught me to calculate property values and spot a bad foundation from 100 yards away. After Mom died of cancer when I was 10, it was just Dad and me against the world for 3 intense years. We were a team, an unbreakable unit. He was grooming me to take over Harrison Properties someday, and I soaked up every single lesson, every nuanced detail, every late-night discussion. Then Brenda Winters entered our lives. She was beautiful, undeniably charming, and she seemed to genuinely care about Dad. I was 13 when they married, old enough to be wary, but young enough to desperately hope for a new, complete family. Brenda brought 2 children from her previous marriage, Ashley, who was my age, and Cody, 2 years younger. For a while, things were okay. Not great, but okay. Brenda made Dad happy, and at that point, that's all that truly mattered to me. But slowly, insidiously, things began to change. My place at the dinner table gradually shifted further from Dad. Our cherished weekend property tours were constantly rescheduled to accommodate Cody's soccer games or Ashley's dance recitals. Brenda began redecorating the house, meticulously erasing every trace of my mother, room by painful room. "You need to give them a chance, Ethan," Dad would always say whenever I complained. "They're family now." By the time I was 16, I had been effectively thoroughly sidelined in my own home. Brenda had positioned herself as Dad's indispensable business confidant, accompanying him to meetings and networking events that I used to attend, absorbing all his attention. Cody, bless his unmotivated heart, suddenly developed a deep interest in real estate, and Dad, ever the optimist, was thrilled. Despite this, Dad and I maintained a strained connection through the business. Harrison Properties was Arthur's life's work, a company that owned and managed nearly 30% of the commercial real estate in Maplewood and its surrounding areas. What had started as a single apartment building purchase when my parents first married had blossomed into an empire worth millions. Property is permanence, Ethan, Dad often said, his voice firm with conviction. Money comes and goes, but land and buildings, they're tangible. They last. I took those words to heart, pursuing business and real estate in college while working summers at Harrison Properties, learning every facet of the business, from maintenance to management to development. By the time I graduated, I was ready, eager, to step into a leadership role. That's when everything shattered. Dad had been planning a massive undertaking, a mixed-use riverfront project that promised to revitalize Maplewood's downtown core. We had spent months, years, on the plans together, meticulously crafting a vision for the community. But when I returned from a trip researching similar developments in other cities, I discovered that significant, fundamental changes had been made without my input. Brenda and I thought a more upscale approach would yield better returns, Dad explained when I confronted him, his words clipped. The luxury condos will simply sell better than the mixed-income housing you proposed. That wasn't the vision, I argued, my voice rising in frustration. We talked about creating something that would benefit the whole town, not just the wealthy. Sometimes you have to be practical, son, he said, his gaze distant. Brenda has excellent instincts for these things. The argument escalated, spiraling out of control. 5 years of pent-up resentment, of feeling replaced, poured out. I accused him of choosing his new family over me, of abandoning our shared values for Brenda's materialistic vision. He, in turn, accused me of being inflexible, idealistic, and immature. Maybe you're not ready for this level of responsibility, he finally snapped, his words a cold dagger to my heart. Perhaps you should take some time to mature before joining the company leadership. That was the last straw. The final, definitive betrayal. I packed my bags that very night, caught a red-eye flight to Singapore, where a college friend had offered me a position in his developing firm. I vowed, with every fiber of my being, to prove I could succeed entirely on my own terms. And I did. Over the next 5 years, I built a formidable reputation for innovative, community-minded development projects across Southeast Asia. My work was featured in international business magazines. I won awards for sustainable design. I made more money than I could ever possibly spend. But the gaping, unhealed rift with my father remained. Monthly calls dwindled to terse holiday greetings, then to nothing at all. I told myself he knew how to reach me if he truly wanted to. But now, thanks to Chloe, I knew the painful truth. He had tried. And Brenda had intercepted his every attempt. After composing myself, wiping the tears, and taking a few shaky breaths, I called Richard Stone and arranged to meet him at his office. The gruff older man had been my father's friend since college, and he had always treated me with a warmth I deeply missed. When I arrived, he greeted me with a bear hug that nearly knocked the wind out of me. "About time you showed up, son," he rumbled. "Your dad was worried you wouldn't come back, even after he was gone." Richard confirmed everything in the video. Every last, astonishing detail. Dad had legally transferred ownership of the most valuable Harrison Properties assets directly to me. The Riverside development lands, the bustling downtown commercial block, the apartment complexes on Maple Street, all had been legally signed over through a series of intricate trusts and transfers designed to minimize tax implications. "Brenda's going to be absolutely furious," Richard warned, his eyes shrewd. "She's been making plans, big plans, based on controlling those assets. She's already in talks with Mark Jenkins about selling the Riverside property." Mark Jenkins, Dad's longtime business rival. A developer notorious for cheaply built, overpriced properties that sucked the soul out of communities. The mere thought of his grubby hands on my father's meticulously assembled portfolio made my blood boil. "What about the will reading?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Richard's expression darkened further. "Gary Thompson has been Brenda's puppet for years. Your dad kept him on as the family attorney to avoid suspicion, but he didn't trust him with the real plan. Gary scheduled the reading for this afternoon, and Brenda's made it explicitly clear you're not welcome." I fingered the cool, crisp property deeds tucked away in my briefcase. "Oh, I think I'll attend anyway." Richard's smile was slow, wolfish, a glint of the old Harrison mischief in his eyes. "Arthur would have loved this. He always said you had his flair for the dramatic moment." As I left his office, I felt my father's presence more strongly, more vividly, than I had since returning to Maplewood. He had entrusted me with his legacy, his life's work, and there was no way in hell I was going to let him down. Brenda and her children were about to learn a very painful lesson. They had profoundly underestimated both Harrison men. Susan Miller had been my father's executive assistant for 20 years, a quiet, formidable woman who knew everything about Harrison Properties and everyone in Maplewood. When I walked into the company headquarters that morning, her face, usually so composed, lit up with genuine, heartfelt pleasure. "Ethan Harrison," she said, rising from her desk to embrace me. "I was hoping you'd come." The offices themselves had changed, sleeker, colder, Brenda's influence starkly evident in the minimalist decor. But Susan's domain remained a comforting throwback, orderly filing cabinets, a thriving potted plant, and family photos, including, I noticed with a sharp pang, several of me that Dad must have kept her supplied with over the years. "Your father wanted me to give you this," Susan said quietly, slipping me a second USB drive. "He made me promise to hand it to you personally, not to mail it or leave it anywhere it might be found." I thanked her, my mind already racing, and asked about the company's current state. Susan's expression turned troubled. "Things have changed since Brenda took over operations. Aggressive cost-cutting, staff reductions. She brought in consultants who know nothing about how your father ran things." She lowered her voice, a conspiratorial whisper. "And Cody, he's been given a VP title, but he rarely shows up. When he does, he makes decisions that undo years of careful work." I probed about specific projects and properties, carefully not revealing what I already knew from the documents and my meeting with Richard. Susan's answers confirmed my darkest suspicions. Brenda had been systematically, ruthlessly preparing to dismantle my father's carefully built empire, piece by piece, for quick profits. "The Riverside development has been completely redesigned," Susan told me, her voice tinged with sadness. "Your father's vision for a community space with affordable housing? Replaced with luxury condos and high-end retail. Mark Jenkins' company is set to take over construction next month." Before leaving, I asked to see my father's office. Susan hesitated. "Brenda had it cleared out last week," she said, claimed she needed the space for the new marketing team. "I'd still like to see it," I insisted. The room that had once been filled with my father's cherished books, his intricate maps, his collection of local historical photographs, it was now an empty, echoing shell. Standing there, in that hollow space, a renewed sense of grim purpose solidified within me. This wasn't just about claiming my inheritance, it was about honoring my father's true vision for Maplewood. I found a quiet, secluded corner in a nearby park, the crisp autumn air doing little to calm the storm within me, and viewed the contents of the second USB drive. This one contained more videos, a series of intimate, deeply personal messages from my father. He walked through various properties, explaining their significance and his profound hopes for their future. He'd recorded these private messages over the last year of his life, creating a detailed, living blueprint of his true vision. "The Riverside project is the most important," he said in one recording, standing on the vacant waterfront property that had been the subject of our final, devastating argument. "This could transform Maplewood, create housing and opportunities for everyone, not just the wealthy. Brenda doesn't understand that a town needs economic diversity to truly thrive. I've transferred this property to you, Ethan, because I know you'll do right by it." In another video, he sat in his office, looking visibly tired but with an unwavering determination in his eyes. I've been watching your work in Asia, Ethan, the sustainable housing development in Malaysia, the mixed-use project in Vietnam. You've taken what I taught you and improved on it. You were right, son, about the direction we should have gone. I was too easily swayed by Brenda's narrow focus on luxury and status. By the time I finished watching all the videos, I had a complete, agonizingly clear understanding of not just what my father had transferred to me, but why. He had painstakingly protected his most meaningful projects from Brenda's corrosive influence, ensuring they would be developed according to his original vision, the vision we had once shared, the one I thought he'd abandoned. My next stop was to meet with David Hughes, the accountant who had handled my father's personal finances for decades. David greeted me warmly, but cautiously, in his small downtown office. "I've been expecting you," he said, closing the door firmly behind me, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. "Your father left instructions that I should assist you once you returned." David meticulously explained the complex financial arrangements my father had orchestrated. Not only had he transferred property ownership, but he had also established a separate business entity, Harrison Legacy Holdings, with me as the sole owner. "The structure is quite elegant," David explained, unfurling flowcharts and balance sheets. "On paper, Brenda believes she's inheriting control of Harrison Properties. But the company as it stands now is essentially a shell. The valuable assets have all been moved to Harrison Legacy Holdings over the past 3 years, through a series of perfectly legal transactions." "Did Dad leave Brenda with nothing?" I asked, a faint twinge of concern, despite everything she'd done. David shook his head. "He was fair, Ethan. The family home is hers. There are investment accounts with substantial balances. She'll receive ongoing income from some of the commercial properties. She won't be destitute by any means. She's just not in control of the empire she thought she was getting." I spent the rest of the morning reviewing documents, making calls, verifying every legal detail. By noon, I was rock-solid confident in my position. The property deeds were valid. The business transfers were properly filed. My father had methodically ensured that his wishes would be carried out, regardless of what his official will might say. As I prepared for the will reading, scheduled for 2 p.m., I felt a strange cocktail of nerves and resolute purpose. Brenda and her children had spent years systematically pushing me out of my father's life, believing they had secured their glittering future by doing so. They had absolutely no idea what was coming. I dressed carefully, choosing my best charcoal gray suit, accented with a subtle blue tie, a gift from my father, Arthur, years ago. In my briefcase, I meticulously organized the key documents, property deeds, business registration papers, transfer records, and undeniable evidence of my father's true intentions. Before heading to Gary Thompson's law office, I made one last, crucial call to Chloe. She had been my closest confidant since my return, and I deeply valued her street-level insights into the confrontation ahead. "Brenda's been telling everyone you abandoned your father, that you don't deserve anything," Chloe warned me, her voice tight. "She's playing the devoted wife role to absolute perfection. Be prepared for theatrics." "I'm not looking to humiliate her," I said, though a part of me desperately wanted to. "I just want to honor Dad's wishes." Chloe's silence spoke volumes. "Okay," I amended, a small, grim smile playing on my lips. "Maybe I want to humiliate her a little." Chloe chuckled, a sharp, knowing sound. "She deserves it. Your dad wasn't happy these last few years, Ethan. He missed you deeply. Whatever happens today, just remember, he wanted you to come home and take your rightful place." With those words bolstering my courage, I headed to Gary Thompson's office, ready to face the family that had so brazenly tried to erase me from my father's legacy. Gary Thompson's law office occupied the entire top floor of one of Maplewood's few high-rise buildings, a modest 4-story structure my father, Arthur, had actually owned. I wondered if Gary even knew that ownership had transferred to me 6 months ago. I arrived 5 minutes before the scheduled time, taking a moment in the lobby to center myself, to feel the quiet hum of power simmering within me. This confrontation had been years in the making, a slow-burning fuse I was finally about to light. Neither Brenda nor her children had any idea. The receptionist looked startled when I gave my name. "Oh, Mr. Harrison, let me check with Mr. Thompson." She disappeared down the hallway, returning moments later with a flustered-looking Gary. Gary Thompson had been my father's attorney for 20 years. He drafted my first will when I turned 18, handled the paperwork when I bought my first investment property at 21. Yet now, he regarded me like a stranger, worse, an unwelcome intruder. "Ethan," he said, not extending his hand, "this is unexpected. Today's meeting is just a small family gathering to discuss preliminary matters." "I'm family," I replied simply, my voice unwavering. My father's only blood relative, in fact. Gary's discomfort was palpable, radiating off him in waves. "Brenda felt it would be best if, given your estrangement, perhaps we could arrange a separate meeting to discuss any concerns you might have." "I'll join today's meeting," I stated firmly. "Shall we?" Without waiting for a response, I walked past him, directly toward the conference room where I could already hear muffled voices. Gary hurried after me, nearly tripping in his haste. When I pushed open the door, the conversation inside abruptly ceased, replaced by a stunned silence. Brenda sat regally at the head of the table, exactly where my father would have sat, dressed in elegant black that complemented her ash blonde hair. Ashley and Cody flanked her like obsequious courtiers. A few other figures were present: Dad's banker, a cousin of Brenda's who had never liked me, and a man I recognized as Mark Jenkins' attorney. Brenda recovered first, her mask of composure slipping back into place. "Ethan, this is a surprise." Her tone dripped with disdain, clearly suggesting it was anything but pleasant. "I came to hear my father's will," I said, taking a seat directly opposite her, my gaze locked with hers. Gary hovered uncertainly at the door. "Brenda, I wasn't aware Ethan would be joining us." Brenda's perfectly made-up face hardened, a venomous glint in her eyes. "This meeting is for heirs only," she said coldly. "Ethan removed himself from this family years ago." I said nothing. Instead, I calmly opened my briefcase and removed a folder of documents, placing it on the table. "I think we should begin," Gary said, taking his seat, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged his papers. "We're here for the reading of Arthur Harrison's last will and testament." As Gary began reading the formal legal preamble, I studied the faces around the table. Brenda maintained a mask of somber dignity, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief. Cody looked utterly bored, checking his watch repeatedly. Only Ashley showed any genuine emotion, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. "To my wife, Brenda," Gary read, "I leave our family home at 247 Maple Avenue, its contents, and the sum of $2 million. Brenda nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips, as if this were exactly what she expected. She didn't seem surprised or particularly grateful. This was clearly the absolute minimum she had anticipated. "To my stepdaughter, Ashley, I leave the sum of $1 million and my collection of first edition books." Ashley looked up, a flicker of genuine surprise in her eyes at the mention of the books. My father's book collection had been his pride, carefully assembled over decades. I was startled, too. This didn't quite align with the plans Dad had shared with me. But I remained silent, waiting. "To my stepson, Cody, I leave the sum of $1 million and my vintage car collection." Cody smirked, a triumphant gleam in his eye. Dad's cars were worth a considerable amount. The 1965 Mustang alone was valued at over $100,000. "As to my business interests," Gary continued, his voice wavering slightly, "Harrison Properties and all associated assets I leave to." Brenda straightened, a triumphant, predatory gleam in her eye. "My son, Ethan Harrison." The room went deathly quiet. Then Brenda let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "That's impossible," she spat. "Arthur changed his will 2 years ago. I was there." Gary looked profoundly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "There was a codicil filed 6 months ago," he admitted weakly. "It reversed the previous changes." Brenda's face flushed crimson with anger. "You never mentioned this." "I wasn't aware of it until yesterday, Brenda," Gary said, his voice barely a whisper. It was filed with the court directly by Arthur. I received the official copy yesterday afternoon. It doesn't matter. Brenda snapped, dismissing his explanation with a flick of her hand. Harrison Properties' assets are what matter, and I've been running the company for the past year. The board will never accept Ethan's leadership after he abandoned his responsibilities. This was the moment. The exact, perfect moment I'd been waiting for. I calmly placed the property deeds on the table, sliding them toward the center where everyone could clearly see. These, I said, my voice measured, steady, are the deeds to the Riverside Development property, the downtown commercial block, the Maple Street apartments, and 12 other key properties. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. You'll notice they're all in my name. Have been for some time. Brenda snatched up the papers, her hands trembling violently as she flipped through them, her eyes wide with dawning horror. These must be forgeries. They're not, I replied, a cold satisfaction spreading through me. Dad transferred ownership to me legally over the past 3 years. You can verify with the county recorder's office. Then, unable to resist the dramatic flourish my father would have absolutely appreciated, I added, You mean, the properties I already own? Cody jumped to his feet, his face contorted with rage. You can't just come back after 5 years and take everything. I'm not taking anything, I replied evenly, meeting his furious gaze. I'm claiming what already belongs to me. What Dad wanted me to have. Brenda's face had gone from flushed fury to an ashen, deathly white. Gary, is this legal? Can he do this? Gary, who was now meticulously examining copies of the deeds with a stunned, defeated expression, nodded reluctantly. The transfers appear legitimate, Brenda. If Arthur signed these properties over while he was alive, they wouldn't be part of the estate. What about Harrison Properties? Brenda demanded, her voice rising to a shrill shriek. The will says Ethan gets the company. The company assets are primarily the properties, Gary explained, looking increasingly miserable. If the properties are already in Ethan's name, then the company itself is a shell. I finished for him, my voice calm, devastating. Dad also established Harrison Legacy Holdings last year, transferring operational control of all these properties to the new entity. I'm the sole owner. The room erupted into absolute chaos. Cody was shouting about contesting the will, his face purple. Brenda was threatening to sue everyone, including poor, hapless Gary. Ashley sat silently, watching me, her expression unreadable, a flicker of something akin to understanding in her eyes. When Brenda finally ran out of steam, her voice hoarse, I spoke again, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through the residual tension. Dad left you financially secure, Brenda. The house, investments, some income properties. He wasn't vindictive. But he built Harrison Properties from nothing, and he wanted its legacy protected. He knew you planned to sell it off, piece by piece. You have no right. Brenda hissed, her eyes blazing. I was his wife. I took care of him while you were off playing developer in Asia. I wanted to come back, I said, meeting her gaze steadily. I called for months after I left. You told me he didn't want to speak to me. A fleeting flicker of guilt crossed Brenda's face, quickly masked. He was disappointed in you, she countered, defiance in her tone. Then why, I challenged, did he leave me everything that mattered to him? Why did he spend the last years of his life creating an elaborate, airtight plan to ensure I would carry on his work? Ashley spoke for the first time, her voice soft but clear. Is it true? Did Mom keep you from talking to Dad? Before Brenda could interrupt, I nodded. According to his videos and letters, yes. He tried to reach me multiple times. Videos? Brenda's voice rose in panic, a desperate, animalistic sound. What videos? I patted my briefcase. Dad was thorough. He documented everything. His decisions, his reasons, his hopes for the future of the business in Maplewood. He knew exactly what you were planning, Brenda. The deal with Mark Jenkins, the luxury condos on the riverside, all of it. Gary cleared his throat, seizing the moment of stunned silence. Perhaps we should adjourn for today. This is a lot to process, and there may be legal questions that need resolving. I agree, I said, rising and gathering my documents, the satisfying weight of the deeds in my hands. My attorneys will be in touch regarding the transition of operational control for the properties. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if no further business decisions are made without my approval. As I turned to leave, Brenda called after me, her voice laced with pure venom. This isn't over, Ethan. Your father wasn't in his right mind toward the end. We'll contest everything. I paused at the door, turning back to face her, a cool smile on my lips. You're welcome to try. But Dad didn't just leave me property and a company, Brenda. He left me the truth. Are you sure you want that made public? The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air as I walked out, my heart pounding with adrenaline, but my step lighter than it had been in years. I had honored my father's wishes. Now came the hard part, rebuilding what Brenda had tried to dismantle, and finally fulfilling the vision my father and I had once so passionately shared. The morning after the will reading, Maplewood was absolutely buzzing with gossip. In a small town like ours, news traveled faster than the internet itself. By the time I stopped at Bernard's Bakery for coffee, I'd received a dozen curious stares and several conspiratorial, congratulatory nods from old-timers who'd known my father, Arthur, for decades. Your dad would be mighty pleased, Bernard himself said, handing me a cinnamon roll on the house. Brenda had folks worried about what would happen to the town if she sold everything to outsiders. I thanked him and took a seat by the window, watching the familiar rhythm of Main Street. Maplewood had changed far less than I had in 5 years. The same shops, the same courthouse, the same enduring sense of community, despite Brenda's best efforts to remake it in her own image. Chloe joined me, sliding into the seat across from mine without invitation. You're the talk of the town, she said, expertly stealing a piece of my cinnamon roll. Brenda's telling anyone who'll listen that you manipulated your father in his final days, and that she'll see you in court. Let her try, I replied, a cold certainty in my voice. Dad documented everything. He was of sound mind and body when he made these arrangements. Chloe's expression turned serious. Be careful, Ethan. Brenda has a lot of influential friends, and Mark Jenkins is absolutely furious about losing the Riverside deal. I was saved from responding by the arrival of Richard Stone, who pulled up a chair without asking. Morning, kids, he said, even though Chloe and I were both well into our 30s. Quite a show yesterday, from what I hear. I filled him in on the details, including Brenda's threats of litigation. Richard waved this off dismissively. Standard bluster. Her legal position is weak, and she knows it. But that doesn't mean she won't make trouble. What kind of trouble? I pressed. The community kind, Richard replied grimly. Brenda spent the last 5 years building social capital in this town. Charity boards, business associations, the works. She's convinced a lot of people that her vision for Maplewood's development is the right one. Selling everything to Mark Jenkins is hardly a vision, I countered, disgusted. People don't know that part, Chloe pointed out. They just see the glossy renderings of riverfront dining and luxury boutiques. They don't understand what it would mean for housing prices or the very character of the town. I spent the rest of the day meeting with key employees at Harrison Properties, reassuring them about their jobs and my true intentions for the company. Most seemed palpably relieved. Brenda's management style had apparently involved a lot of threatening to fire people. But a few who had aligned themselves with her were noticeably cold, their faces hostile. Susan had organized the files I needed to review, giving me a comprehensive, horrifying picture of the company's current state. It wasn't pretty. Cash reserves had been depleted. Maintenance on properties had been egregiously deferred. Several valuable parcels of land had been prepped for quick, below-market sales. She was stripping the company for parts, Susan said bluntly, her voice laced with indignation. The implications were clear. A few more months and Brenda might have done irreparable, irreversible damage to my father's legacy. That evening, I returned to the house, Brenda's house now legally, though I was still staying in the guest room until I found more permanent accommodations. The atmosphere was glacial. Brenda had retreated to the master suite, emerging only to glare at me when our paths crossed in the hallway. Cody was openly hostile, slamming doors and muttering threats under his breath. But it was Ashley who surprised me, knocking tentatively on my door after dinner. Can we talk? She asked, looking uncomfortable but determined. I invited her in, curious, wary. Ashley and I had never been close. She had mirrored her mother's lead in freezing me out of family activities from the beginning, but we had never been outright enemies either. She perched awkwardly on the edge of a chair. I wanted to apologize, she said after a long moment of silence, for how things went with Dad, with Arthur. I raised an eyebrow at her use of his first name. He was always your dad more than ours. Anyway, she acknowledged, a sigh escaping her. Cody pretended to be interested in the business, but it was all an act. He just wanted the money and status. And you? I asked, my voice guarded. Ashley sighed again, a deep, weary sound. I just wanted a family. When Mom married Arthur, I thought we'd all become one big, happy unit. But she was always pushing, positioning Cody, and excluding you. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't know how to stop it. Her confession seemed genuine, but I remained guarded. Why are you telling me this now? Because I found something, she said, pulling a small, leather-bound notebook from her pocket. After the will reading, I was curious about what Arthur, was really thinking. So, I went through some of his things that Mom had packed away. She handed me the notebook. It was my father's journal from the past year, filled with his raw, honest thoughts about the business, his illness, and his fractured family, including his profound regrets about our estrangement and his growing, undeniable concerns about Brenda's manipulative influence. He wasn't happy, Ashley said quietly. He missed you. And he was starting to see through Mom's manipulations. I flipped through the pages, recognizing my father's distinctive handwriting, his characteristic blunt assessments. There were detailed notes about Brenda's meetings with Mark Jenkins, her insidious efforts to isolate Arthur from old friends, her relentless pressure to change his will. Does your mother know you have this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ashley shook her head. She'd be furious. But I thought you should have it. It confirms what you said about Dad wanting you to come home and take over. I studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. Why show me this? You're basically giving me ammunition against your mother. Because it's the right thing to do, she said simply, her gaze steady. And because I want to stay in Maplewood. I love this town. I don't want to see it destroyed by Mom's schemes or by a family war. Before I could respond, shouting erupted from downstairs. We hurried down to find Cody and Brenda locked in a heated argument with an unfamiliar woman who bore a striking, undeniable resemblance to my father. You have no right to be here. Brenda was shrieking, her voice shrill and panicked. Arthur never acknowledged you. The woman noticed me on the stairs, and her expression instantly changed. You must be Ethan, she said, her voice calm amidst the chaos. I'm Sarah. Sarah Davies. Arthur was my father, too. My half-sister. A sister I never knew existed. Another bombshell, another seismic shock in a week overflowing with them. That's a lie. Brenda snapped, her face contorted. Some desperate ploy for money. Sarah shook her head. I don't want money. Arthur and I had a relationship for years, private at my request. I just came to pay my respects and meet my brother. She extended a hand toward me, her eyes, so like my father's, cautious but hopeful. I took it, feeling another, crucial piece of the puzzle that was Arthur Harrison's life fall into place. It seems we have a lot to talk about. Brenda made a sound of pure disgust. I won't stand here and watch this farce. Come on, Cody. She stormed out, Cody trailing behind her, muttering darkly. Ashley hesitated, then quietly, almost imperceptibly, slipped away, leaving me alone with a sister I never knew I had. Sarah smiled tentatively. Well, this isn't exactly how I imagined our first meeting. Nothing about this week has gone as imagined, I replied with a wry, exhausted laugh. But I'd like to hear about you and your relationship with Dad, if you're willing to share. We moved to the living room, and Sarah began telling me about her mother's brief, whirlwind relationship with my father before he met my mother. How she had discovered her paternity as an adult, and how Dad had welcomed her into his life, quietly respecting her wishes for privacy. He talked about you all the time, she said, a soft smile on her face. He was so proud of what you were accomplishing in Asia, even while he missed you terribly. As Sarah spoke, I felt both profound grief and immense gratitude washing over me. Grief for the years lost with my father, for the secrets he'd kept. And gratitude that he had found ways to protect his legacy, his true legacy, despite Brenda's corrosive interference. The road ahead would be challenging. Brenda's threatened lawsuits, the community divisions Richard had warned about, but I was more determined than ever to honor my father's vision for Harrison Properties and for Maplewood itself. Later that night, as I pored over company documents in the guest room, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Mark Jenkins. "We need to talk. This isn't over." I stared at the message, a cold certainty settling in my gut. The battle for my father's legacy, and for Maplewood's very soul, was just beginning. The weeks following the will reading were an absolute whirlwind of activity. I officially took control of Harrison Properties, working tirelessly with Susan to assess the damage Brenda had wrought and to develop a comprehensive recovery plan. The employees, by and large, rallied around me with palpable relief, grateful for clear leadership after months of Brenda's chaotic, fear-driven management. "Your father would be proud, Ethan," Susan told me, her eyes shining, as we reviewed the updated business plan. "This is exactly the steady hand the company needs." Not everyone, of course, was pleased with my return. Several board members who had aligned themselves with Brenda resigned in a huff of protest. Mark Jenkins, ever the opportunist, launched a public relations campaign, slyly suggesting that an absentee heir couldn't possibly understand Maplewood's needs the way his development company could. The most surprising development, however, came from Brenda herself. After weeks of furious threats and public posturing, she unexpectedly requested a meeting at her attorney's office. "Be careful," Richard warned me when I told him about it. "Brenda doesn't make conciliatory gestures unless she has a cunning angle." I agreed to meet her, intensely curious about what she could possibly offer that would interest me. Chloe insisted on accompanying me as moral support, waiting in the lobby while I faced Brenda and her sharp-faced attorney. Brenda looked immaculate as always, but there was a new, brittle quality to her perfect appearance, a subtle fragility that hadn't been there before. The stress of the past month had clearly taken its toll. "I want to propose a settlement," she said, without preamble, her voice tight, to avoid costly litigation and public spectacle. Her attorney placed a document on the table between us. "Mrs. Harrison is willing to withdraw all claims against the estate and property transfers in exchange for operational control of the Riverside Development Project." I nearly laughed out loud. "The most valuable property in the entire portfolio." "That's not a settlement," I said, my voice cool. "That's a heist." "It was my idea," Brenda insisted, her voice rising. "I worked with Arthur on the plans for years. That project is my vision." "It was Dad's vision long before you came into the picture," I corrected her, my tone firm. "And it wasn't luxury condos and boutiques. It was affordable housing, community spaces, local businesses." Brenda's facade cracked slightly. "Maplewood needs to evolve, Ethan. The old way of doing things is dying." Arthur understood that toward the end. "Did he?" I asked, pulling out my phone and playing one of Dad's videos, the one where he explicitly stated that Brenda didn't understand his true vision for the Riverside property. Brenda's face flushed with anger, then absolute fury. He was sick. Confused. He was clear-minded enough to legally transfer his most important assets to me, I pointed out, and to document precisely why he was doing it. The meeting ended at an impasse, with Brenda storming out, her attorney promising further legal action. But as the weeks passed, no lawsuit ever materialized. According to Richard's sources, Brenda's attorneys had advised her that her position was legally untenable. Meanwhile, I had been getting to know my half-sister, Sarah. Unlike Brenda's children, Sarah had absolutely no interest in the family business. She was a professor of environmental science at a university in Colorado, passionate about conservation and sustainability. Our conversations sparked new ideas for incorporating green spaces and sustainable design into the Riverside development. Dad would have loved that, Sarah said when I shared my updated vision. He was always interested in environmental initiatives, but Brenda discouraged them as too costly. Ashley had become an unexpected, invaluable ally in navigating the transition. She had wisely distanced herself from Brenda's machinations, moving into an apartment downtown and offering insights into her mother's business dealings that proved priceless. Mom's been liquidating her personal assets, she informed me during one of our regular coffee meetings. Selling jewelry, art, even some of her designer furniture. I think she's planning to leave Maplewood. Cody remained hostile, but increasingly isolated. His friends in town had begun to distance themselves as rumors of his involvement in some of Brenda's more questionable business decisions circulated. The real breakthrough came during a town council meeting where I presented my revised plans for the Riverside development. Gone were Brenda's cold luxury condos and exclusive shops, replaced with a vibrant mixed-use development that included affordable housing, dynamic spaces for local businesses, a true community center, and extensive public access to the waterfront. This, I explained to the packed meeting room, my voice resonating with conviction, is the development my father originally envisioned. A project that would benefit all of Maplewood, not just the wealthy few. Mark Jenkins was there, of course, armed with his own glossy presentation and empty promises of tax revenue from his high-end development. But when residents began asking sharp, pointed questions about housing affordability and public access, his proposal quickly lost support. The Harrison plan preserves Maplewood's character while allowing for growth, Chloe argued passionately from the audience. The Jenkins plan turns us into just another playground for the rich. The council voted unanimously to support my proposal, dealing a decisive, undeniable blow to both Mark and Brenda's avaricious vision for Maplewood's future. As I left the meeting, Mark approached me, his expression grim but tinged with a grudging respect. "You win this round, Harrison," he said, his jaw tight. "But I've been in this business a lot longer than you. I can wait." "Or you could adapt," I suggested, a small smile touching my lips. "There's room for your company in my development plan, if you're willing to work within a community-focused framework." Mark seemed startled by the offer. "Why would you suggest that?" "Because despite everything I acknowledged, you're good at what you do. And Dad always said that a smart businessman can find a way to do well by doing good." We didn't reach an agreement that night, but the door had been opened. Sometimes, reconciliation and new opportunities come from the most unexpected directions. The final confrontation with Brenda came not in a sterile courtroom, but in the peaceful garden of what had once been our family home. I found her there one evening when I came to collect the last of my belongings before moving into my own place. She was sitting on a stone bench near my mother's rose bushes, looking smaller, older, and strangely fragile. When she saw me, she didn't lash out as I expected. "I'm leaving Maplewood," she said simply, her voice devoid of its usual venom. "There's nothing for me here anymore." I sat beside her, maintaining a careful, unspoken distance. "Where will you go?" "Back to Connecticut. My sister is there." She glanced at me sideways, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "You've won, Ethan. The company, the town's support. Even my daughter's loyalty. Are you satisfied?" The question wasn't entirely bitter. There was a genuine, almost vulnerable curiosity in it. "It was never about winning," I said after a moment, the words ringing true. "It was about honoring Dad's legacy. About doing right by Maplewood." Brenda was quiet for a long moment. "He changed after you left," she finally said, her voice distant. "Became more distant, more focused on his projects. I thought if I took an interest in the business, it would bring us closer." "And then you got a taste for it," I suggested, my voice devoid of judgment. She didn't deny it. "I'm not apologizing for wanting security, Ethan. When you've been left with nothing once in your life, you do whatever it takes to make sure it never happens again." I thought about the complex woman beside me, manipulative and materialistic, yes, but also undeniably shaped by her own profound fears and past experiences. "Dad left you financially secure," I reminded her. "The house, the investments. You didn't need to try and take everything." "Need has little to do with it," she replied with an unexpected, raw frankness. "But it's done now." She stood, straightening her shoulders, her regal posture returning. "I've instructed my attorney to withdraw all objections to the will and property transfers." In return, I expect you to honor the provisions Dad made for me and my children. I never plan to contest those, I assured her. She nodded once, a brief, businesslike conclusion to our fractured relationship. Goodbye, Ethan. I doubt we'll see each other again. As Brenda walked away, I felt not triumph, but a strange, complex mix of relief and sadness. The family I had once desperately hoped for when Dad remarried had never materialized. But in its place, new, unexpected connections had formed, with Sarah, with Ashley, with the vibrant community of Maplewood that had welcomed me home. The next morning, brimming with a renewed sense of purpose, I met with the Harrison Properties team to officially launch the Riverside Development Project. As I looked around the conference room at the eager faces, including Ashley, who had recently joined the marketing department, I felt my father's presence strongly, a comforting, guiding force. My father used to say that property is permanence, I told the team, my voice clear and resonant. What we build here will outlast all of us. So, let's make sure it's something Maplewood can be proud of for generations to come. As the meeting broke up, Chloe approached me, a warm smile gracing her lips. Your dad would be really proud, Ethan. I nodded, a profound sense of peace settling over me for the first time since returning to Maplewood. I think he would. And I think this is just the beginning. 1 year after my tumultuous return to Maplewood, I stood on the newly constructed observation deck, overlooking the Riverside development. What had once been vacant, contested land was now a bustling construction site, the first phase of buildings. Already taking shape. Mixed-income housing units flanked a central green space, while the foundations for the community center and local business incubator were being laid closer to the water. Quite a view, Richard said, joining me at the railing, his gaze sweeping across the burgeoning project. Arthur would have loved this. I nodded, thinking of my father's original, passionate vision for this property and how terrifyingly close it had come to becoming something entirely different, something hollow and soulless. I wish he could see it. He can, Richard said simply, pointing to a bronze plaque we had installed at the entrance to the development. Arthur Harrison Memorial Park would be the centerpiece of the project, ensuring that my father's invaluable contribution to Maplewood would forever be remembered. The past year had been utterly transformative, both for Harrison Properties and for me personally. Taking control of my father's company had forced me to finally put down roots in a way I deliberately avoided for years. To fully engage with the community, not just as a developer, but as a citizen with a deep, personal stake in its future. The scholarship committee approved all 15 applications. Sarah informed me, consulting her tablet as she approached, her face alight with excitement. My half-sister had moved to Maplewood 6 months ago, helping to establish the Arthur Harrison Foundation, which provided educational opportunities for local students interested in sustainable development and community planning. Perfect, I replied, a genuine smile spreading across my face. And the internship program launches next month. We've already got partnerships with 3 colleges. Sarah had become an integral, beautiful part of my life, bridging the chasm between my past and my present. Through her, I learned stories about our father I'd never known, his quiet environmental activism, his anonymous support for students who couldn't afford college, his patient mentorship of young entrepreneurs. He never wanted recognition, Sarah explained once. He just wanted to make things better. In that spirit, I had fully redirected Harrison Properties toward development that balanced profit with undeniable community benefit. It wasn't always easy, of course. Mark Jenkins and his allies on the Business Council frequently opposed our more progressive initiatives, but we were making steady, undeniable progress. Surprisingly, it was Ashley who often helped navigate these intricate political waters. Having grown up watching Brenda charm and manipulate her way through Maplewood society, Ashley had developed a keen, almost intuitive understanding of the town's complex social dynamics. Mark is planning to speak against the affordable housing expansion at next week's council meeting, she warned me as we walked back to the office. He's been lobbying council members behind the scenes. Any suggestions? I asked, having learned to truly value her strategic thinking. Ashley smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. I've already arranged for residents from the first phase to attend and share their stories. Mark can argue with us, but he can't argue with families who now have stable, safe housing because of the development. Back at Harrison Properties headquarters, I found Susan waiting with a stack of documents requiring my signature. Among them was the final paperwork, formally severing Brenda's remaining connections to the company. She had agreed to sell her minority shares in exchange for a lump sum payment. "Have you heard from her?" Susan asked, her voice cautious as I signed the forms. "Not directly," I admitted. "Ashley says she's remarried and living in Greenwich. Apparently, she's joined the board of an art museum and is busy reinventing herself as a philanthropist." I harbored no ill toward Brenda anymore. She had acted according to her nature, just as my father had ultimately acted according to his, by ensuring his legacy would be protected. The Arthur Harrison I had come to know through his videos, his journals, and the heartfelt stories others shared was far more complex than the father I thought I knew. More strategic, more farsighted, more forgiving of human weakness. "You've got dinner with Chloe at 7, Susan reminded me, a knowing smile on her face as I handed back the signed documents. "And don't forget, the Historical Society wants an answer about the old mill property by tomorrow." I thanked her and headed to my office, my father's old office, which I'd lovingly restored to something resembling its former state, with the addition of my own personal touches. The Count of Monte Cristo painting hung in its original place, though the hidden key was long gone. Photographs lined the shelves, not just of me and Dad, but now including Sarah, Ashley, Chloe, and other important people who had woven themselves into the fabric of my life. The most meaningful addition was a simple framed note that had been among my father's personal effects. "Property is permanence, but legacy is in people." I'd even made a cautious peace with Cody in a manner of speaking. After several months of open hostility, he had finally approached me with a business proposition. He wanted to open a high-end restaurant in one of the Harrison Properties buildings downtown. Against Susan's advice, "He'll mess it up," she had predicted darkly. "He has no work ethic," I had agreed, offering favorable lease terms. But surprisingly, Cody's restaurant had become a resounding success. He had, against all odds, found his passion in the culinary world, something Brenda had apparently always discouraged as beneath their social status. While we would never be truly close, we had reached a civil, unspoken understanding. As the sun began to set over the river, painting the sky in fiery hues, I made a final call to check on the status of the memorial scholarship named for my mother. This had been one of my first initiatives upon taking control of the company, creating a fund for young women pursuing careers in architecture, my mother's unfulfilled dream. The first recipients graduate next spring, the program administrator informed me. They're already asking about internship opportunities with Harrison Properties. After hanging up, I took a moment to reflect on how far I'd come since that rainy day in Singapore when I'd received the devastating news of my father's death. I had returned to Maplewood angry and hurt, my sole focus on claiming what was rightfully mine. But somewhere along the way, that mission had transformed into something far larger, far more profound, honoring not just my inheritance, but the immense responsibility that came with it. The confrontation at the will reading, my dramatic moment of placing those property deeds on the table, it all seemed like a lifetime ago. It had been satisfying, yes, but the real satisfaction came from what followed. The relationships rebuilt, the community strengthened, the legacy secured. Chloe was waiting for me at our favorite restaurant, her smile warming me from the inside out as I approached. Our friendship had deepened irrevocably over the past year, gradually evolving into something more profound, something precious. She had been my anchor through the tumultuous transition, my patient guide to the Maplewood that had changed and grown during my absence, and eventually, my partner in both business and life. "The Riverside lookout is spectacular," I told her as we settled at our table. "You should see the sunset from up there. Show me after." "Dinner," she suggested, her eyes sparkling. I nodded, already planning to bring champagne. The ring I'd purchased last week was burning a joyous hole in my pocket, waiting for the perfect moment. As we enjoyed our meal, I found myself thinking about the incredible journey that had brought me here. The inheritance I had fought so hard for had turned out to be so much more than mere property deeds and business assets. It was a chance to finally reconcile with my past, to forge new, unbreakable connections, to build something truly meaningful on the solid foundation my father had painstakingly created. The real estate deeds I had dramatically presented at the will reading had been undeniably important. Yes, they had given me legal control of my father's legacy. But the true inheritance was the vision and values he had so deeply instilled in me, the lessons about community and responsibility that had shaped my approach to development, even during our years apart. Brenda had never understood that. She had seen the properties as mere assets to be leveraged, the business as solely a source of wealth and status. She had tragically missed the deeper purpose, the profound drive that had powered my father throughout his entire life. As Chloe and I walked hand in hand along the riverfront after dinner, the gathering twilight painting the sky in soft, ethereal hues, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for my father's foresight, for the second chance at truly belonging in Maplewood, for the opportunity to build something that would genuinely outlast me. "What are you thinking about?" Chloe asked gently, noticing my contemplative mood. "Legacy," I replied, squeezing her hand. "What we leave behind. How we're remembered." She squeezed my hand back, her smile radiant. "Your dad would be proud of what you've done here. What you're still doing." I nodded, a quiet, deep understanding settling in my heart. I thought of the complex, imperfect, yet ultimately loving father I had come to know better in death than I sometimes had in life. He had made mistakes. We all did. But in the end, he had done his absolute best to protect what mattered most. As we reached the observation deck overlooking the project that would define Maplewood's future for generations, I knew it was time. The ring box felt heavy in my pocket. But my heart? My heart was light. Whatever came next, I was exactly where I was meant to be, building on my father's legacy while creating my own. This journey, this fight, taught me that true inheritance isn't about property or money. It's about the values, the vision, the unwavering spirit passed down through generations. And sometimes, the sweetest victories are the ones that rebuild, not just destroy. So tell me, what's your most powerful inheritance story? Have you ever had to stand up for what's rightfully yours against people who tried to take advantage? Or faced a moment where you had to choose between pure justice and a chance at reconciliation? Share your experiences in the comments below. I'm genuinely eager to hear them. If this tale of family drama and unexpected redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and sometimes just plain shock you. Thanks for watching, and remember, legacy isn't written in stone, it's lived, fought for, and built day by day.